Carol Koury is going to speak, and Carol has she has long ties on Martha's Vineyard. She came here in 1975, and she then went on to marry her husband, Mal Jones. They have 3 children. They have 2 grandchildren, and all of them grew up on the island. And Carol is a lifelong gardener, having spent her childhood summers in New Hampshire helping her grandmother grow and preserve all the foods that she and her family ate. In 2003, Carol started spending winters in Asheville, North Carolina, and in 2009, she founded an open pollinated seed company, SowTrue Seed. SowTrue sells 500 varieties of open pollinated vegetables, and you're going to hear about what that is in a minute, herbs, flowers, and seeds throughout North America, including a rack at SBS. Carol's passion is in helping people understand where their food comes from so that they can be informed consumers. So I'm so happy to welcome Carol, who came all the way from North Carolina to speak to us today. So thank you, Carol. Do you want to use this mic or this one? Hello, use this one. There we go.
Hi.
You can stand here. We have a booby trap system up here.
Mm-hmm. So I started a seed company in part because I really like to eat. And make no mistake about it, seed equals food. Everything you ate this morning, with the exception of the salt, came from a seed. So I'm just here to tell you that seed/food is being threatened. You can break seed down into a million categories, but 2 of them are natural seed and unnatural seed. Natural seed would be open pollinated seed. That's the kind that my company sells. It will reproduce the fruit from which it came. So for example, if you grow a Cherokee purple tomato, which is an open pollinated seed, and you save that seed and you plant it next year, lo and behold, you will come out with a Cherokee purple tomato. Farmers can save them and reuse them, and that's simple. Another natural kind of seed is hybrid, which is a natural process that's both created by humans and done in nature. They're created for desirable characteristics, like a particularly purple zinnia, or a very sweet tomato, like Sun Gold tomato, which is very popular little yellow cherry tomato. You can save the seed from a hybrid, but it won't do you a whole lot of good if what you wanted was what you started with, because it's unstable seed by virtue of coming from 2 entirely separate parents. You can only use the first generation, and if you were to go to a seed catalog like Johnny's sells a lot of wonderful hybrids, you'll see F1 stands for first generation hybrid. You have to purchase those seeds. Unlike open pollinated seeds, you have to repurchase every year because you don't have the parent seeds. And just to throw in here, an heirloom, which is very hot these days, is simply an open pollinated seed that has been being saved since before World War II. We are now trying to breed the next generation of heirlooms by breeding for the conditions that exist today, resilience to today's pests and diseases and growing conditions, including uncertain climate. Unnatural seed, GMOs, genetically modified organisms, GE, genetically engineered. Transgenic, taking the genetic material from an animal and placing it in a plant, as famously was done with putting fish genes in a tomato. They're made in a laboratory and done by chemical companies. chemical company looks at an agricultural problem, let's say weeds. They've solved a lot of those problems by creating poisons that kill weeds. Of course, weeds are plants, so those poisons kill plants. So what's the problem here is, if I want to sell a crop and my poison, I want to create a crop plant that will not die when I spray my poison on it. Monsanto did that with Roundup Ready corn, which is its very, very high-selling, profitable poison. Roundup is glyphosate. They went to their scientists, and the scientists figured out that there was a bacterium in the waste disposal facility of a factory that made glyphosate, Roundup. And this bacterium survived glyphosate. It didn't die. So don't quote me on this science, because boy, I don't know how they do it. But they take genetic material from the bacterium that doesn't die. They somehow insert it into the genetic material of, in this case, the corn. They create plants from that genetic material, and then those plants go on and act like any other corn. They reproduce and don't have to be modified each year. Now, those seeds are bound by patents. You can imagine how much money it costs to create. And these companies are, after all, companies looking for profit. So here are the challenges with unnatural seed. The first is that they are unsustainable. If you listen to Big Ag, they will tell us that the only way to feed the world is with genetically modified seed, because it's stable, it has high yield, pretty easy to grow if you put enough poison on it. And I would counter that the problem with that is that A, it leads to monoculture. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the Midwest, but if you drive through Nebraska or Iowa, year after year after year after year, you will see the same plants growing in the same soil. And as it happens, plants need soil to grow. And we are terribly depleting that soil. They make up for it by putting a lot of petroleum products in the form of fertilizers. But at some point, that soil is going to collapse. There's no doubt about it. The fact that some weeds now have become immune, some weeds, plants, have become immune to the poison, nature will always come through, right? So pour enough poison on anything, any natural thing, and eventually it will figure out, something will select. So there are now super weeds and super bugs that don't die when you put glyphosate on them. So what's the answer? More and different poisons affecting the health of the people around that are being sprayed by this stuff. It's often put on by planes, affecting water and affecting health. Organic agriculture is simply old-fashioned agriculture. My grandma wouldn't have called herself an organic farmer, but she didn't use poisons or unnatural fertilizers. We dug the coffee grounds into the ground and we saved our garbage and made it into compost. And it survived because it is sustainable. It takes care of the soil. It uses natural procedures for ensuring the crops. You lose crops. It's not as easy as having an instant answer by poisoning, but the food is healthier, and that's provable. And it's longer term. It's going to be here and has been here for a really long time. Another challenge with GMOs is that they are patented. There are 8 large companies that control 3/4 of all the seeds sold in the United States. You can see that on the posters that are around out there. 8 large companies: Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, Limagrain, Land O'Lakes, think butter, KWS, Bayer, think aspirin, and Dow, think Agent Orange. Notice that none of those are seed companies. Who owns our seed? Seed equals food. In this country, 3/4 of it is owned by chemical and pharmaceutical companies. Farmers can't save those seeds. In fact, they get sued for unintentionally having their crops contaminated by GMOs. So we come to biodiversity, which is my biggest worry. Biodiversity is nature's insurance. If you're going to have a blight and you only have a couple of varieties of a plant, they might all go down with the blight, as happened famously in Ireland in the 1800s, when the Irish grew 5 kinds of potatoes that were imported from Peru, where there are hundreds and hundreds of kinds of potatoes. And all of the potatoes fell to a blight. Had there been 50 kinds, maybe, it's entirely possible that some of those varieties would have survived, as would many more of the Irish. Corn is the big example. We grow huge amounts of corn in the United States, and most of it is to feed animals or make ethanol. 9 out of 10 corn plants grown in the United States are genetically modified. 80% of those are owned by Monsanto and sold as Roundup Ready and BT. Sweet corn is a small part of the market in corn, but starting this year, sweet corn, genetically modified sweet corn is going to become widely available. And when you go into a market to buy a corn product, you won't know, because of course there's no labeling about whether it has, for example, Bacillus thuringiensis, one genetically marketed form of corn has BT, which is actually an organic poison. But it has it in every cell of the plant, and it's to prevent European corn borers, which are a real pain if you've ever grown a corn crop. It works by having an alkaline toxin in it that explodes the stomachs, the guts, of the corn borer. Every cell in that plant has something that explodes the guts of a corn borer. You want your kids eating that? The biodiversity part about corn is that corn is a wind-pollinated plant. That means that the pollen floats with the wind down to fertilize other corn plants. It will float for a mile, 2 miles. It's been measured to float for 20 miles. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, hello. If I'm an organic farmer, or if I'm just a farmer like the Athern family growing old-fashioned corn for people that is not genetically modified, and I happen to be downwind of your corn, the chances that my corn is going to become contaminated with your corn are very high. And what that means is that it is getting harder and harder and harder to source corn seed that is not genetically modified. I meant to bring some, there are a couple of jars on the SowTrue seed table back there. And one of them is organic popcorn grown by a friend. It's a threatened seed. It's harder and harder to get. There's also, by the way, another wind-pollinated crop is sugar beets. I have some organic sugar beets down there. Also a threatened crop, harder and harder and harder to source. There are health risks. Most of them aren't known, probably. We know that some of them include birth defects, kidney and liver function, reproductive problems, to name a few. But the reason we don't know is because they aren't studied. Who pays for scientific studies in the United States? The government and industry. The industry has such huge influence in the government, and in the FDA, it's enormous influence, to the extent that the deputy director of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, who oversee the health of our food, is a guy named Michael Taylor. His last job, he was a lobbyist for Monsanto. So he's taking care of us. And then there's the lack of choice. There's no labeling. The industry has put millions and millions and millions of dollars into making sure that we don't know what's going into our food. And that's against popular opinion. Most of us would really like to know whether we choose to eat it or not. And so 80% of all of the products on grocery store shelves have a genetically modified product in them. It is becoming irrevocable. We are losing our chance. The United States uses 2/3 of all genetically modified seed that's grown. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to lose our food sources. Thank